In this new World Aeternum beginner guide for console and PC players, I want to give you a bunch of information that's going to help you get off to the best possible start. Having played hundreds of hours of New World, the New World Aeternum Open Beta, and many more hours since the game launched yesterday, I have a lot of information to share about how to get things done, and things that can save you a lot of trouble just by knowing a small piece of information. So the first thing I want to tell you to do before you do anything else is go into your settings and change bandwidth mode to high. This will make your game look instantly better. Do it now and thank me later. Here you can also turn off camera shake if it bothers you. It definitely bothers me, so turn that off as well if you want. The next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is damage types in New World Aeternum and how important they are. When you deal damage to an enemy with a damage type, it's either going to do white numbers and deal full damage, or it's going to deal yellow numbers and do increased damage. And you need to pay attention to what color of numbers you're getting, because that gives you an idea of what damage types are good against certain enemies. And there aren't a ton of enemies in New World Aeternum anyway, so you should be able to remember this after you see this a few times. Now, each weapon in the game does a different damage type, but there are some weapons that have skills that deal different damage types than they normally deal. For instance, the rapier deals thrust damage with its light and heavy attacks, but it does have a couple skills that deal slash damage. Same with the sword. It does slash attacks with its light attack, but its charged heavy attack and heavy attack deal thrust damage, and some of its skills deal slash and some deal thrust, and even some of the shield skills in that line deal blunt or strike damage. So being mindful of what damage type each skill does is important, and you can look at these when determining which skills to use. And note two other things on damage type. First is that if you see orange damage, this means that you did critical damage. You did a critical strike. This happens a lot if you're shooting things in the head with a bow or a musket, or if you attack enemies from behind. All of these will automatically guarantee a crit. So you should be trying to do these things when possible. And they will show orange whether the enemy is weak to that damage type or it's just normal against that damage. So that doesn't determine anything. You need to look for the yellow or white numbers when you're not critically striking to really understand if an enemy is weak to that damage type or not. And lastly, if you're a returning player, you will not see blue damage numbers anymore, indicating that an enemy is resistant to your damage type, simply because this has been removed from the game. So now all damage types will at least deal full damage or potentially more damage based on what weapon and what skill you're using. And something else I want to mention about skills, besides noticing about them their damage types, is that you should look at their hitboxes and the way they attack. If an enemy is hit by the hitbox of your weapon, it's going to take damage, and a lot of abilities, when you're reading the description, it's not inherently obvious that they may hit multiple enemies, and depending on where you're standing, you could actually hit multiple enemies with certain skills and certain attacks. So learning how to use those abilities and where to position yourself because of the hitboxes of the game and the way they're designed is really, really important. So make sure you do that. For instance, the Great Axe, Great Sword, and Sword have great AoE abilities early on, and their sweeps, their light attacks, tend to swing through enemies and hit multiple enemies simultaneously, so they're a great choice for melee. Whereas if you're using like a rapier or a hatchet, you're not going to see the swings go very wide or through many targets simultaneously, and those are generally better for single target. The next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is crafting, and something that I think every player should do immediately upon getting to the first town after doing, the main quest line for about 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how fast you are, is find materials and craft yourself some iron tools. Instead of using flint tools, get yourself to iron tools as quick as you can. This is not hard to do. All you need is some iron ingots, coarse leather, and wood in order to do this, and you can get a significant upgrade to your tools. And why that's important is it increases your gathering speed. So as you're, cutting down logs and you're mining ore or whatever you're doing, it's going to be faster. You're going to get more done in less time. And as you continue to upgrade your tools to steel and so on, it's going to be even faster and faster. And this is really, really important for saving your valuable time. So make sure you upgrade your materials. If you know you're going to spend a lot of time harvesting materials at the beginning of the game and that's something you like to do, go upgrade your tools as soon as you can. And just kind of to piggyback off that, the nodes of resources that spawn in New World Aeternum are going to spawn in the same places over and over. So if you find yourself like a great spot for iron, for instance, and you go there and there's a bunch of big nodes and you harvest it all, if you come back later, it will respawn and you can get it again. And sometimes it's better to kind of camp those nodes than it is to go exploring and maybe not find any nodes. But the idea here is that when you find nodes, try and remember where they are on your map, and it will help you to find them and get them quicker. And, iron nodes are typically around rocky cliffs and mountainous areas. Hemps are usually in fields, other things in the game, like woods everywhere, obviously. And you kind of start to learn where these are after you play. But try and remember where you find the nodes, the big ones, the ones that you really like, so that you can kind of create like, oh, I need some ore, I know exactly where to go, etc. And another point that I want to drive home is that you should really aim to get your logging, mining, harvesting, tracking, and skinning up to 50 as quickly as you can. These particular 5 skills, and the reason for that is it will allow you to gather most of the materials you need for the early parts of the game. If you continue along the quest line and you don't have all these up, you're going to start running into nodes that you can't harvest, and you're going to be missing out on valuable materials that are just there while you're doing your questing, and you'll actually have to like manually go back, harvest a bunch of stuff, even if that's not what you want to do, to get your crafting higher so that you can kind of naturally get that stuff while you're questing. It's better to just harvest the stuff as you go while you're going than it is to have to grind it up later. And obviously you will have to do some grinding at some point, but try and get those to 50 as quickly as possible. And I also want to note that logging will take you by far longer than any of these other 4. So definitely spend some time logging because I don't think you're going to get it naturally completely. And another thing I want to mention about crafting is that I highly recommend crafting yourself, the 1 or 2 weapons that you're using once you first get to town. If you're going out and harvesting ore and getting some leather and wood to make your tools, you might as well just get a little extra and make yourself some weapons as well. These weapons will be much stronger than what you have already, and they will be much stronger than most quest rewards that you will receive for probably the next 5 to 10 hours of the game in my estimation. So if you want to be really strong really quickly, highly recommend crafting a couple weapons. Even just the most basic iron weapons you can craft at the beginning of the game will be better than what you can find for a little while. So if you want to be strong, do that. If you would rather not have a better weapon than what you're going to find for a while, then don't do that. And one final tip about crafting is that there are town project boards in each major town that have crafting quests where you give them materials or you craft certain things, and then you turn them in and you get XP for doing that. And I highly recommend using your extra crafting materials to do this. Like, for instance, if you went and made yourself a weapon or you made your tools and you have leftover materials, and you're not going to be crafting anything for a while, it's a great way to rank up your armor smithing or your weapon smithing without making like tons of muskets or tons of swords that you don't actually need. So this is a good way to get XP out of it and use those crafting materials to rank up your crafting at the same time. The next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is fast travel and mounts. Mounts were added to the game a while back, and now you're going to get your mount quest once you reach level 20. You sort of see this horseshoe shape on the map. If you go there and start the mount quest and then complete it, you will get your first mount that will help you traverse the landscape. Highly recommend doing this as soon as you get to level 20, because you do run around a lot in this game, and it will save you time. So make sure you do your mount quest when you reach level 20, and if you're wondering, like, how do I get a mount, blah, 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 just keep leveling up, keep doing the main quest, and eventually that quest will appear on your map, and you can go do it. The next thing is fast travel. There are fast travel points all over the map in New World Aeternum, and you can fast travel from a fast travel point to any other fast travel point, or to a settlement, and from a settlement to any other fast travel point. But there is no fast travel in between these areas. So, like, you can't just be in the middle of the landscape and fast travel somewhere. You need to use these points. So it's important to unlock the fast travel points when you see them, just to make things easier for you in the future. And another thing that's really great is the fact that you can recall to an inn. If you go to an inn in a settlement and set it as your inn, check into that specific inn, every 15 minutes you can recall to that inn for free. So maybe you are in that settlement, you're doing quests outside of that town, you go do them and you finish them all, you can just recall back to the inn, turn them all in, and then go out and get all the quests and go out and do this again. Make sure you continuously change this as you move around the map. And another thing about fast traveling is that it costs Azoth in order to do, and the amount of it depends on how far you're going, etc. And this is not a resource that's easy to come by at the beginning of the game. This resource is used for fast travel and also for crafting. So you definitely want to try and use it sparingly. You're not going to want to fast travel all the time, particularly at the beginning of the game, which again is why it's important to get a mount so you can save yourself some of this Azoth. So there are several ways to gain Azoth. You can get them from completing quests, by fighting off corruptions on the landscape. You can get them sometimes just from killing random enemies, you'll get some. And you can purchase some on the trading post, though it's quite expensive to do generally. And another great way to get Azoth is by to look at tools and try and purchase or find or craft tools that give you a chance to gain Azoth when used. And this is usually like 35% chance or something like that. But if you have this on all your tools, every time you go harvest ore or harvest wood or, gather whatever, you're going to gain some Azoth some of the time. And even though it's only 1 Azoth each time you do it, or, 35% for 1 Azoth, it's simply going to give you Azoth for just playing the game you would play anyway, and eventually that will stack up and give you Azoth. So highly recommend getting this on all your crafting tools early on in order to build up a supply of Azoth. And one thing I would highly recommend too is to not spend your vials of Azoth, or not consume them. Don't sell them if you can avoid it unless you really need gold, because there is a cap on Azoth. It's like 2,500 or something like that. And if you reach that cap, you can't gain any more. So they've kind of limited, you can't just hoard a lifetime supply of Azoth. However, the consumables, the vials of Azoth that you can get from buying or dropping from, loot, etc., you can stack these up in your inventory and then you can consume them when you need them. So you can kind of hoard Azoth this way in the consumable form, and that will allow you to keep Azoth even if you're at cap, right? Because you have all this in your inventory that's not technically counting towards the cap. So save those for later on in the game when you're crafting and you need your Azoth. Moving on to the factions of the game, once you get around level 20-ish, you're going to be able to join one of the 3 factions of the game that's going to influence your PvP mainly, because you can still do expeditions with people from other factions. And basically the differences between these factions are their motivations and the themes of them. So, which one you pick is kind of up to you, but just keep in mind that you're going to PvP with or against people that are from your faction or other factions. So, like, if your friends are all Syndicate, for instance, and you're not Syndicate, when you go to PvP, you're going to PvP against them. So try and be in the same faction as your friends if you plan on PvPing together. And there are a couple ways to PvP in New World, but the one that you really should be concerned with at the beginning of the game is the open world PvP. This is probably the most PvP that you're going to see at the beginning of the game, because like wars and stuff are not happening as regularly. And basically the way that this works is that if you're going to PvP, you'll flag up in a town once you've joined a faction, because you can't PvP unless you're, know who your allies and who the enemies are. And then you'll go out on the landscape and you can do your quests while you're flagged, or you can just go out and look for other players that are flagged. You will only be able to attack other players that are flagged, and only other players that are flagged will be able to attack you. So if you're running around on the landscape and you see another player's flagged but you're not, you can't do anything to that. So you have to decide consciously before you go out if that's something you want to do or not. Now, if you're playing with a group of friends and they're all flagged up and you run out on the landscape and you forgot to flag up, you're going to have to go all the way out back to the settlement and flag up. So make sure that you are sure you're flagged before you go out and flag up if you haven't. And something else that I want to mention, in early game PvP, your weapon skills and your weapon mastery are by far the most important thing for success. Because if you only have 2 skills on your bar, it's going to be a lot harder to beat an enemy that has 3 skills and a bunch of passives. So make sure that you are ranking up your weapon mastery and hopefully have, all 3 skills for 2 weapons on both bars and a good amount of passives by that point before you go out there. Otherwise, if you're going out there, you're brand new and you don't even have that going on, it's going to be a tough time for you, because you really can't PvP until you're around a level 20-ish anyway, because you have to join a faction. You should have this done, but I'm trying to impress upon you that the weapon skills that you have and the way that you're set up in PvP is the most important aspect, besides obviously your own personal skill, and that you shouldn't be too concerned about your gear, etc. And even player level is not as important as having these skills, so keep that in mind. And something else I want to mention as just a tip, if you're playing a melee character in PvP in this game, you need to have a way to catch opponents or to get into melee range quickly. Particularly with the addition of lock-on, you're going to be taking fire as you're getting close, and you need a way to get in melee range. When you get into melee range, you're going to be doing good damage against ranged characters, but you usually find that they are going to try and run away from you. So you have to have a way to slow them down, to catch up to them. Every player has the same movement speed, regardless of armor type that they have, but they may or may not have skills that improve their movement speed or not. So if you're playing a melee build, highly recommend that you have a mobility skill, something like Charge, for instance, or maybe Berserk from the Hatchet line, that's going to allow you to move more quickly so that you can catch up to your target while it's fleeing from you. Because a lot of times, you get a target down to 25% of their health, and they'll start running away. And if you can't catch them, it's a 10-minute run after them until they get to the next settlement, and then you got nothing for all your investment. So make sure you have this if you're a melee character. And if you're a ranged character, make sure you have a way to get away. And also moving on to talk a little bit about weapons and armor and jewelry and stuff like that, and how to get good stuff like this. You can obviously craft them if you want. It's not a bad way to get some early game stuff. But eventually, once you get about level 25, 28, 30, somewhere in that range, you're going to start running expeditions, and you're going to start becoming high enough level to farm bosses to get exceptionally good weapons and armor. Now, if you're a group PvE player, you're going to be running expeditions, you're going to be getting really strong loot from there, and that should be the main way to improve your character gear-wise besides crafting. Now, if you're a solo player or maybe a duo player and you don't really run dungeons and you want to get some good loot, the best way to do that, besides crafting again, is to go farm bosses on the landscape. And these bosses always spawn in the exact same places, and they usually have about a 90-second or a couple-minute respawn time or 5 minutes respawn time, and they have loot pools that they can drop. And they can drop mediocre stuff, but they can also drop really good stuff. And the best things that they drop are all bind on pickup, meaning you can't trade them, can't buy them off the auction hall. The only way to get them is to go and have them physically drop for you by killing this boss. And those are the items you want to look out for when farming bosses. I have a guide for this on our blog for different weapon types. So if you're looking for a greatsword, or you're looking for a musket, or you're looking for a blog, there's certain bosses that you want to farm. But one thing I want to mention about these bosses is that even though some of these bosses are low level, they can drop very high level gear. But there is a caveat here, and that's that you have to be a certain level with each boss for that item to drop. Meaning, like, you can't go at level 10 and farm a level 20 musket and then use it at level 20. You might need to be level 20 for that to drop, or maybe you need to be level 25 for it to drop. So be sure to look at our guide when you're trying to figure this out and look at what level these drops at. Because if you go and try and farm it before you're high enough level, you won't ever see that drop and you'll be like, why am I never getting this? And you'll just be wasting your time. And keep in mind, these are all bind on pickup. So you can't have like a friend who's higher level go farm it for you and then just give it to you. You have to farm it yourself. But these are some of the best items you can get early on, and they will definitely increase your success in combat for a good ways. Like, some of these items will last you 10 or more levels when you get them. So they're definitely worth farming if you don't run expeditions. And besides weapons, obviously, when it comes to armor, you're going to have to decide whether you want to be lightweight, medium weight, or heavyweight. And obviously, there are drawbacks to these things. The lighter you are, the more damage you're going to deal. The heavier you are, the less damage you're going to deal, but the more protection that you have. And this also affects your dodge rolls. Like, if you're lightweight, you're going to have a dodge roll. If you have medium weight, you're going to have kind of like a jump step. And then heavyweight has a very minimal dodge. So this is also going to impact that. And I highly recommend, if you're PvEing, that you try and stay mostly in the light or medium weight, because you're just trying to kill enemies quickly. Generally, you're not really worried about tanking enemies unless you're playing like in an expedition where you're trying to be a tank. Or maybe you're playing like group PvP or solo PvP where you're going to be taking a lot of hits. But generally, when you're questing, you're just trying to kill things quickly and move from one thing to the next, so lightweight is the best way to do that. And also, something I want to mention is that you can actually wear, if you're playing like light, you can wear 1 medium chest and 4 light pieces of armor and still come out in the lightweight range. And also, if you're playing medium, you can wear 4 medium pieces and a heavy chest and still come out medium. So that'll give you the most protection possible. Remember that weapons don't weigh anything in the game. They do not add to your total weight. So that is not an issue here, although shields do. So keep that in mind. So that wraps up our New World Aeternum Beginner Guide. I hope you guys are enjoying the game so far. I'm having a blast playing on PlayStation 5, starting a new character. Forgot how much I enjoyed the beginning part of this game. The end game of it is not my favorite part by any means. It doesn't have as much of an end game as I would really like it to have. The beginning part, where everyone's figuring out, everyone's running around, cutting down trees, and you're getting into low-level PvP skirmishes before the whole map's been taken over. I really, really enjoy that part of the game. What do you guys make of the tips? Was any of this helpful to you? Let me know in the comments below.